This is a Trident Disabilities audio archive recording. The Dust That Measures All Our Time by Stephen Connor, published October 13th, 2021. From the mythical Sandman who participates in dreams and vision to an irritating grain lodged in a beachgoer's eye, sand harbors unappreciated power, however mundane. Stephen Connor celebrates this most untrustworthy type of matter. Below this is an Aurelian sand ripple at Southburn, a photograph from Vaughan Cornish's Waves of Sand and Snow from 1914. There are atoms and the spaces between them. Surmise makes up the rest. A quote by Democritus in Diogenes Laertius. Sand belongs to the great, diffuse class, undeclared, rarely described, but insistent and insinuating of what they may be called quasicote matters. Among them, mist, smoke, dust, snow, sugar, cinders, sleet, soap, syrup, mud, toffee, and grit. Such pseudo-substances hover, drift, and ooze between consistency and dissolution, holding together even as they come apart from themselves. And, of all these adhesive matters, sand is surely the most untrustworthy, the most shifting and shifty. Nobody would seriously consider taking a stand on a cloud, but sand has betrayed many an architect and edifice. Sand is at once architectural and iconoclastic. An 18th century continuation of Baron Munchausen's adventures describes how the Baron and his party survive a whirlwind of sand by scooping an igloo-style sand chamber in which to shelter from the storm, and then digging a tunnel from their bunker back out into the light. Sand has the capacity to engulf and undate, blurring contours, eroding and erasing every edge and eminence. As such, it is the ultimate mockery of the performance of stone, for it is no more than one of stone's own moods, the manner in which stone, atomized, consumes itself. Shelley's Ozymandias imagines the monumental statue of Ramesses the Great dismembered on the Egyptian stands. The shattered chunk of head, legs, and pedestal portend a further, finer comminution, after the membra disjecta themselves will have been milled away into flatness. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away. Below this is two images, the first one holding a monument with 4 figures and 2 pillars at the end. It describes an 1844 daguerreotype by Joseph Philibert Geralt de Prangy depicting the funerary temple of Ramesses II from around 13th century BCE. Below this features a different angle of this, featuring people in the picture on the far right and people in the far left as well, standing around the head of a statue. This is labeled a tinted lithogram based on watercolors by David Roberts from Louis Haig's Egypt and Nubia from 1847, titled Fragments of the Great Colossi at the Mnemonium. Surely the most treacherous of all kinds of sand is quicksand, whose prefix indicates that it is alive enough to hunger for the lives of the unwary. Quicksand doubles the dubiousness from what is already an uncertain substance. Where sand is hard and soft at once, quicksand, a fine sand, that has become saturated with liquid, is also ambiguously wet and dry, bonelessly loose, yet syrup-gluey. Walter Charlton, in his tormentedly Latinized Englishing of Pierre Gassedy's Neo-Atomism, uses quicksand to image the paradox of all matters, the perpetual inquietude of atoms, even in compact concretions, because the reverberations or visualizations of atoms regarding several points of them in space, like bees variously interweaving in a swarm, must be perpetual. Therefore also must never quiesce, but be as variously and constantly exagitated even in the most solid or adamantine of concretions. To appearance, nothing more, yet quiet and calm, yet really no quicksand more internally tumulated. Sand has also been a source of quickening. Drops of sweat or spittle on sand or dust were thought to breed mites and fleas by spontaneous generation. Mythical beings have frequently been shaped from sand, like the jinns who take flight in the form of Zobaia, a whirlwind that raises the sand in the form of a pillar of great height. In Cornish tradition, the troublesome spirit Treagle was condemned to toil endlessly at the task of making a truss of sand, bound with ropes similarly of sand, and carry it out of the water to a rock. The howls of the storm are said to be his cries of rage as the waves repeatedly scatter his work. A more contemporary emanation of sand is the irreciprocable Samid, or Sand Fairy, of E. Nesbitt's Five Children in It, from 1902. Found by a group of children at a sand pit, which has the power of granting wishes by blowing itself up to enormous size and then suddenly letting itself down again. Sand fairies are rare now, it explains, because they used to live in the sand castles made by children on the shore, but nearly all died out after catching cold from the seawater flowing into the moats around the castles. Below this is two images, the first one including a dome of sand floating above the ground. It was several plumes of sand coming up from around it and twisting around. This describes whirlwinds of dust, figures from L.C. Regulus's The Ocean, Atmosphere, and Life from 1873. Below this is a sand fairy who is figured at the bottom, rolled up in a ball with a big belly. In black and white, 4 children surround it, laughing and giggling, all with hats on their heads. This reads, illustration by H.R. Millar from a 1905 edition of E. Nesbitt's Five Children in It. Sand is reversible. Only utter desiccation can attain to this pouring, milk-smooth liquefaction. Sand baths were used in the ancient world both to draw out the damp ague of rheumatism and as a kind of sauna to promote perspiration. Sand is the product of abrasion, but is also itself abrasive, used in sandblasting to etch and burnish. Pliny tells us the use of sand under a saw edge to make a clean cut in marble and to polish it after it has been carved. Sand signifies neutrality, indifference, and uniformity, yet it also has a hair trigger sensitivity and responsiveness. A grain of sand, in actual fact often a parasite, is the irritant that provokes in the oyster the nacreous secretions that build into a pearl. Sand has a favored relation to sound, putting a hoarse rattle in the throat of a wind and in itself all ears. In 1787, the German physicist Ernst Celani showed how drawing a violin bow over a metal plate could induce in the fine sand sprinkles on it, and hierophantic figures in the sound, in quivering mandalas and ripple-fingered arpeggios. Though sand can disfigure and obliterate, it can also disclose the ghost risks of wind and the perpetuations of the earth. It is a detection and reception mechanism, forming ridged isobars, shivering musculature, oscilloscape of the air, sculpting shoves, and dust. Below this is 12 circles, each one having a different star shape in the middle. The top left one being just a line, the bottom left one being circular lines, the bottom right one being a humongous star with the edges nearly at the end of the circle, and the top right one being dark all around the edges with a white star in the middle. This reads, figures from Ernst Chanley's 1787 Discoveries of the Theory of Sound. Sand participates in dream and vision. The Sandman breaks sleep by throwing or blowing sand into the eyes of children. But the sand does more than merely seal the eyes, for in many versions of this nursery tale, it is the very stuff of dreams that are made of, and the numb matter of sleep, swirling, particulate, and the Sandman carries in his sack. The somnolence of sand is redoubled when in Top Hat, from 1935, Fred Astaire soothes Ginger Rogers to sleep in the hotel room below him by spreading sand on the floor and hush dancing a Soror's soft shoe shuffle. The origins of moonwalking are to be found in the novelty slides and scrapes upon the sanded stage by music hall acts like Wilson, Keppel, and Betty. Speculative as it may be, but sand is also the secret stuff of omen and auspice, and the practice of divination through tossing and scrying handfuls of sand, known in Arabic as ilm al-mural, the science of the sand, or what might have been its Greek equivalent, semonmancy. Sand is not only temporary, but it is also the most temporized form of matter. It is the image or allegory of time, shifting yet unshiftable. It seems a compiling of the minced, mounded years that go into its making, and grains of sand imitate the elementary atoms of time. Moment upon pattering moment. Sand is featureless, without joints or divisions, even though it is nothing but divisions all the way down. Yet it is this very feature that makes it useful in the measurement of time. For unlike other materials, sand will flow easily and regularly, even as its volume diminishes. Sand glasses came into use in part because of the need to measure time at sea, far from any landmark. Speed would be measured by counting the number of knots in a rope paid out from the back of the ship, and the time it took for the sand to run through a half-minute glass. A half-hour period of watch, known as a glass, was also measured in this way. Grains of sand in the form of quartz crystals, from their precise oscillations, still micro-regulate our time. In fact, the sand of hourglasses was often not quartz sand at all, but powdered marble or eggshell. But we have found it hard to give up the idea of the affinity of sand and the glass through which it runs, since silicates of sand are still the most important source of glass. George Herbert imagines the inner fusion when he writes that flesh is but the glass, which holds the dust that measures all our time, which also shall be crumbled into dust. While for Gerald Manley Hopkins the soul itself is soft sift in an hourglass. At the wall fast, the mind with emotion adrift, and it crowds and combs into the fall. Below this is a woman sitting on a couch, holding an hourglass, looking at it eerily. She has a crown on her head and blonde braids surrounding her face on either side. The detail for this reads, Detail of the allegorical temperance from the fresco cycle, The Allegory of Good and Bad Government by Ambrogio Lorenzetti, at the Palazzo Pubblico in Siena from around 1338. Sand enters into composition with cinema, and cinema is repeatedly drawn to the shimmer and mirage of sand. The graininess that is the signature of film, tiny particles of metallic silver formed from photosensitive silver halides on its surface, is a tactile nap that seems to distinguish analog from digital images. Yet this granularity is also a reminder of what film shares with sand in its composition, namely the capacity to create the illusion of a continuously variable wave from a very large number of discrete and discernible particulars. Strictly speaking, all apparently analog forms are smooth accumulations of digital, that is, discontinuous forms, like the illusion of movement formed from the multiple images on the film strip. The glissandi of sand, producing molar solidity in motion from the molecular massings of disparate bits of matter, are therefore essentially cinematic. Filming sand through the glass lens that is itself another of sand's semblances, cinema seems to come up from the elementary syntax of its own process. Sometimes seemingly razor-hewn, the crescent declivities, scoops of dune shadow and chiaroscuro, escarpments of sand can make it seem a physiologically of light itself. When pestled by the sun's long poles, sand piles and piles itself, then crumbles in size. It is an arena of hallucinations, a terrestrial aurora. The eye surmises ledges and laminar curtains peeking away, furling fringes of aching incandescence, frizzling surf edges of riptide, lifting aprons, sheets of paint that sag and reel, pools of liquid that sizzle dry in an instant, cliffs that collapse in gentle, pensive catastrophes, whole plains suddenly shivering, slowly closing eyelids, a letting down of blinds. Never less, never more, never now again would it once. Only just now was mulling itself over, taking its own measure, counting up on losing count, showing its workings in its long humped volumes, page turned on, crumbling page, in the calendar of its becomings, combing and grooming, sieving and riddling, going with the grain, never creasing, going over it again, keeping it going on coming, the desert does itself like an incalculable sum.